During the April of 1919, the Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Emanuele Orlando, disappointed by the Allies' unwillingness to support Italy's claim in the Dalmatian region, left one of the meetings of the Paris Peace Conference. In the end, the negotiation led to the Treaty of Versailles, which gave Italy Trentino, Tyrol, Trieste, the region of Istria, and a few Dalmatian islands. The results of the treaty were badly accepted by the Italian public opinion. There was, especially among nationalists and veterans, the belief that all the sacrifices that Italy made during the war were not being rewarded, that they had been for nothing. On the pages of one of the most important Italian newspapers, a poem was published, with one of the verses reading, "Our victory, you will not be mutilated." The term mutilated victory became widespread in the country, representing Italy's dissatisfaction with the outcome of the peace negotiations. The author of the poem was Gabriele D'Annunzio. In this period, D'Annunzio was one of the most famous Italians in the world. He was a poet, a writer, a playwright, a journalist, and a politician. But he was much more than that. He was incredibly popular in Italy, both among the high society and among the common people. He was famous for his lavish and spectacular lifestyle and for being a womanizer. He thought that the creativity of the artist could not manifest itself in the boundaries set by modern society, and he hoped to lead a spiritual renovation that would establish a world based on new ideals. When the war started, he was very vocal about wanting Italy's participation, hoping that the conflict would spark the change he desired. When the nation joined alongside the Allies in 1915, he enlisted immediately, despite being 52 years old and lacking any previous military experience. He was mostly active in the aviation, but also fought as a soldier in the trenches, where he often gave passionate speeches that helped to raise the morale of the troops. During the last year of the war, he took place in two iconic endeavors. During the night between the 10th and the 11th of February 1918, 3 Italian motorboats reached the Bay of Bakar, where some Austro-Hungarian ships were stationed, and shot them. While no ship was sunk, the action lowered the opponent's morale, showing how easily Italy could damage its fleet. The acronym of the motorboats used by the Italian attackers was MAS, and D'Annunzio would use it to coin one of his most famous mottos, Memento audere semper, meaning remember to always dare. D'Annunzio proved faithful to this sentence, as in the August of the same year it took place in the flight over Vienna, when 11 planes flew behind the enemy lines and reached the Austrian capital, where D'Annunzio unleashed a bombing of 390,000 flyers, with a message that invited the citizens to rebel against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Again, this feat was useless from a military standpoint, but it nevertheless had vast influence on the public opinion. After the war, D'Annunzio became one of the most vocal nationalists, wanting Italy to annex way more territories than what it ended up having. The symbol of this desire for expansion became the city of Fiume, the modern-day Rijeka in Croatia. Its population was mostly Italian, and the National Council of the city had asked in the October of 1918 to formally join Italy. Yugoslavia, however, had a claim on the city and the surrounding region. After the war, the city was put under the occupation of an inter-allied army, but tensions soon arose between the Italian soldiers and the rest. In an evening of June 1919, a few French Marines ran into a group of girls in the streets of Fiume. When one of them tried to take an Italian cockade from one of the girls, some Italian soldiers intervened and a fight erupted. The Allies decided to make the units of Sardinian grenadiers, which were involved in the shootouts, leave the city. They stop in the nearby city of Ronchi, where 7 officials make an oath, declaring that they'll fight until death for Fiume to join Italy. Seeking a leader, they decide to contact D'Annunzio and to propose him to guide them on a march to conquer the city. One of them goes to Venice and asks to be received by the poet. Without batting an eye, he accepts their offer to lead them. During the 12th of September, 40 convoys, led by D'Annunzio in his car, leave Ronchi, driving towards Fiume. Just outside the city they are stopped by the General Pittaluga, who is in charge of the Italian troops stationed in the city. D'Annunzio exits the car and walks up to him. The general talks to him and tries to convince him to leave behind his foolish endeavor and to not rebel against the authority of the government. The poet answers in the most theatrical way. I understand. You, general, will shoot on my soldiers, who are your brothers. Well, before that, you may shoot me first. Yes, general, let them shoot here, he says, as he uncovers his chest, full of war medals. The general, of course, doesn't want to kill him, and has no choice but to let D'Annunzio pass. He enters the city at midday, greeted by an enthusiastic crowd. The soldiers offer D'Annunzio to rule the city, and he accepts, assuming the title of Comandante, while still leaving in place the National Council, but subordinating their decisions to his approval. In the afternoon he appears from the balcony of the governor's palace and gives his first speech to the population. It was the first of many, and this type of personal communication with the crowd will be appropriated by Hitler and especially Mussolini, along with many other elements of D'Annunzio's rhetoric. Meanwhile, the Italian government is taken by surprise. The new Prime Minister Nitti learned of the conquest of Fiume through a newspaper, and he felt betrayed knowing that soldiers participated in it. He decides that the best strategy is to wait, as he knew that most of the army and of the public opinion supported D'Annunzio's action, and a military intervention could lead to a revolt and the government being overthrown. He wishes to use the situation as leverage to obtain more significant gains from the Allies. He imposes a blockade on the city, which is however mitigated, as he secretly allows the Red Cross to smuggle food and resources inside the city to not let the population starve. The Allies in the end decide to leave it to Italy and Yugoslavia to find an agreement about Fiume and the surrounding area, and they remove the inter-allied troops from the city. The action taken by the poet is well received by the nationalist and extremist forces, and they hope it can become a catalyst for the fall of the Nitti government and pave the way to a revolution of some sort. Mussolini is among them, although his conduct will remain ambiguous during this period, staying in contact with D'Annunzio and seemingly supporting his plans in order to gain popularity, while also hesitating to take any concrete action. In the first period of D'Annunzio's government, Fiume seems to prosper. The city is enveloped by a euphoric atmosphere. Plenty of volunteers come to Fiume, so much so that D'Annunzio has to tell them to stop, as the city couldn't sustain them all. Drug use, especially of cocaine, is very common. The city produces famously delicious pastries. The luxury and beauty of its clubs are praised by visitors, and the soldiers are having so many sexual encounters that D'Annunzio himself has to bribe them. You surpass every limit. It's strange that I, of all people, must tell you this. This period of excitement doesn't last long, however, because as time passed, the economy of the city gets worse. Operations in the harbor, which was the biggest contributor to Fiume's economy pre-war, are halted, leading to widespread unemployment. To gather resources, the city resorts to piracy. A bunch of raiders, calling themselves Uskoks, borrowing the name from pirates that inhabited the area during the 16th century, seize many ships that navigate in the sea around Fiume. The biggest heist is the ship Persia, which was transporting 13,000 tons of weapons and ammunition, but a lot of food will also be obtained this way, while sometimes the captured ships are set free in exchange for a sum of money. The pirates were fundamental to the city's economy, but provided a lot of trouble for Italy. In November, the Italian Prime Minister Nitti requests to hold new elections, which he hopes will give him a bigger majority. The new government, made up of liberals and Catholics, confirms Nitti again. At the end of the month, the General Badoglio is tasked to meet with D'Annunzio to reach an agreement. The poet is offered a treaty, the so-called modus vivendi, with which Italy guarantees the formation of an independent free state of Fiume, which will be connected to Italy by a strip of Italian territory. In exchange, D'Annunzio and the rebel troops will leave the city. The proposal is presented to the poet, who asks the opinion of the National Council, which approves it. The information reaches the population, and the more radical forces in the city gather a crowd, directing it outside the governor's palace. Hearing the noise, D'Annunzio appears on the balcony, shows to the people the text of the treaty and starts reading it. He then asks to the crowd, "Do you want it?" To which the people respond with a loud no. D'Annunzio decides that the acceptance of the modus vivendi will be decided with a referendum. Over 85% of the citizens vote to accept the treaty. However, the results are dismissed by D'Annunzio, who announces to the population, "Resistance until the last piece of bread, until the last drop of blood, until complete victory." From this point, the politics of the Comandante change, becoming more radical, and a lot of the more moderate politicians and soldiers leave the city as a result. The socialist revolutionary Alceste de Ambris is invited to the city, becoming a sort of vice president. D'Annunzio now wants Fiume to become a model for a worldwide revolutionary movement that would free oppressed people around the world. In this period, D'Annunzio also takes into consideration the idea of marching on to Italy and overthrow the government. A plan is presented to him. According to it, he would lead the Italian far-left forces in a march over Rome. He accepts, and the plan is joined by the anarchic leader Enrico Malatesta. The Italian Socialist Party, however, refuses to participate, and the plan fails. The government of Fiume is also in contact with other oppressed populations, like the Egyptians and the Irish who were under the British control, and with communist Russia. The idea of D'Annunzio is to unite all the oppressed populations of the world in an association that would rival the League of Nations, which was seen as a representative of the interests of the colonial powers. To quote D'Annunzio, "To the League of Nations, to this scheme of thieves and privileged crooks, we will oppose the League of Fiume, gathering here the representatives of all those populations that today endure oppression." D'Annunzio also seeks an alliance with those populations that were subjugated to the Serbs in Yugoslavia, like Croats, Montenegrins and Albanians. He develops a plan. Each population will rebel at the same time, and with the help of troops from Fiume, will cause the dissolution of Yugoslavia and establish independent states. This will strengthen Italy's position in the area and make it easier for Fiume to be annexed. However, all of these projects will end up with no concrete action taken. Meanwhile, at the start of the year 1920, the situation inside the city is getting worse. In February, the Italian government tightens the blockade on the city, which sees its economy fall. Inflation and unemployment skyrocket, and the workers go on strike. D'Annunzio solves the issue by mediating between the workers and the businessmen, establishing a minimum salary and ending the strike. The economy, however, doesn't improve much. D'Annunzio has an idea to exploit the situation. With a public announcement, he asks the Italian families to house and feed the children from the city until the situation gets better. The idea is a success, putting the city at the center of the public opinion once again and painting the Italian government in a bad light, as it is accused by D'Annunzio of starving the city. In Italy, in the meantime, Nitti loses the majority in June and resigns, being succeeded by Giovanni Giolitti, an old politician who dominated Italian politics at the start of the 20th century and who is now prime minister for the 5th time. Giolitti has been critical of Nitti's caution in regard to Fiume and seeks to come to an official agreement with Yugoslavia. In September, D'Annunzio and De Ambris published the Carta del Carnaro, the new constitution for the city of Fiume, which is incredibly radical and progressive for the time. The government of the city guarantees equality to everyone, freedom of speech, press, association and religion. Women can not only vote, but are also eligible for public office 25 years before that would happen in Italy. The right to divorce, which already existed in Fiume, is confirmed. Half a century before that right will be granted in Italy. The workers were divided in different associations based on their job, on a model inspired by medieval guilds. The constitution also regulates the relationship between the central government and cities, leaving vast autonomies to them. To counteract excessive bureaucracy and to avoid forming a class of politicians, the parliament sessions are very rare, and the people in charge change often. Inspired by ancient Rome is the figure of the comandante, a man who in case of danger could take dictatorial powers for up to 6 months. The Carta, however, will never be applied, mostly because D'Annunzio's adventure is coming to an end. He has lost the support he once had, both inside Fiume and in Italy. Mussolini is growing distant with D'Annunzio, partly because he thinks that siding with the newly elected Giolitti is the best idea to grow his influence and popularity. D'Annunzio knows that he doesn't have much time before Italy and Yugoslavia reach a compromise for Fiume, and he's thinking that the times might be mature for a coup in the motherland. He presents Mussolini with a plan for a march on Rome by both fascists and Fiume soldiers. After overthrowing the government, Italy will adopt the Carta del Carnaro and D'Annunzio will obtain full power. Mussolini, however, is not convinced. He responds by asking for an equal role in the insurrection and says that the best moment will be in the following spring. D'Annunzio refuses, as he feels that by next year his Fiume will no longer exist. And he is right about that. On the 12th of November, the Treaty of Rapallo between Italy and Yugoslavia is signed. It settles the border between the two states and establishes that Fiume will be an independent state, connected to Italy by a line of territories along the coastline. Most of the Dalmatia region goes to Yugoslavia. D'Annunzio denies the treaty and reacts by occupying the islands of Rab and Kirk and by invading the neighboring city of Susak, while also occupying the hills around Fiume. The majority of the population of Fiume and of the poet's associates, however, are happy about the treaty. Most want the city to return to a state of normality after more than a year of uncertainty and economic downturns, and even Alceste de Ambris tries to convince the Comandante to accept the treaty, thinking, rightfully so, that the city wouldn't be able to resist an attack by the Italian troops. Even Mussolini declares himself happy with the Treaty of Rapallo, closing any hope for his help in a coup. D'Annunzio, however, remains committed to his decision. In December, the treaty is voted in the Italian parliament, where it is accepted with a vast majority. There is no more room for negotiations between Italy and Fiume. Giolitti will only accept unconditional surrender, while D'Annunzio is ready to fight until death. The reason for his stubbornness is unclear. He thinks that Italy's population will be on his side, and won't allow Giolitti to attack the city, and he also feels that by surrendering he will cowardly betray everything that his adventure is about. One thing is certain, despite the odds, Fiume won't go down without a fight. On the 20th of December, the city is surrounded by Italian troops and is now under a complete blockade. D'Annunzio announces the state of war. The conflict, that will be remembered with the name Bloody Christmas, starts on Christmas Eve. In the morning, the Gulf of the city is full of warships. The first shots are fired in the afternoon, while inside the city an uprising takes place organized by opponents of D'Annunzio. The revolt is however quickly sedated and the participants arrested. During the evening, the Italian army advances outside the city, while the Comandante orders to destroy the bridges connecting Fiume with the neighboring city of Susak. The first day of combat ends with little done, thanks mostly to both sides' unwillingness to cause a massacre of their fellow compatriots. On Christmas, the Italian general declares a truce for the day, hoping that D'Annunzio will finally decide to surrender, which isn't the case. On the dawn of the 26th, the Italian army explodes an armory and the soldiers start to advance decisively, but they encounter a fierce resistance. The streets of the suburbs are filled with barricades, while women are contributing to the fight too, either as nurses or even as soldiers themselves. Italy's troops are forced to retreat momentarily, giving Fiume's soldiers the opportunity to counterattack. The Italian general decides to deploy more men, and during the afternoon he orders the artillery and the warships to start firing. The ship Andrea Doria aims at the governor's palace, where D'Annunzio is planning the battle with his associates and shoots. The surgeon Antonio Gottardo is killed by a splinter, while D'Annunzio is only lightly scuffed and is evacuated from the building by his men. Another shot hits the part of the building where D'Annunzio Praviat's apartment is located, and then the warships start shooting at the rest of the city for over an hour. Now the poet's will is broken. By shooting at him, Italy has betrayed him and showed that it doesn't deserve him. During the night his collaborators try negotiating a ceasefire, however they are met with refusal. An agreement will only be possible if D'Annunzio accepts the Treaty of Rapallo. The bombing of the city resumes the following day, but it stops in the evening, with a new negotiation scheduled for the following morning. The conflict ends, having caused more than 50 deaths and over 200 injured. The government of Fiume surrenders and declares that it will be subjected to the Treaty of Rapallo. A provisional government will be established, which will organize elections for the now free state of Fiume. D'Annunzio obtains, at his request, a general amnesty for all the participants on his side. In the following days, all of the people that participated in the endeavor will abandon the city. D'Annunzio himself leaves Fiume on the 18th of January. A lot of the soldiers that participated in his adventure will later join fascism, while D'Annunzio abandoned politics and isolated himself from the rest of the world in the comfort of his house, resuming writing. In 1921 he published Notturno, which became an instant success. He maintained a relationship with Mussolini, although he never identified fully with fascism and was often critical of it. At some point Mussolini nominated him president of the Royal Academy of Italy, an association of intellectuals where he almost never showed up, and started giving him a state allowance to keep him under control. The Free State of Fiume was short-lived, as in 1924 a coup led by fascists overthrew the government. As a result, the Treaty of Rome was signed with Yugoslavia, annexing Fiume to Italy. The city would lose the importance it once had, and after the end of the Second World War it became a part of Yugoslavia together with the surrounding area.